Why can't Gensler answer the question of, is this a security? Is this not? You said it's the second largest digital asset in the world. That seems like a pretty straightforward yes or no answer then. Is it he doesn't know or he doesn't want to answer it?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, I think in the back and forth, he kind of demurred a little bit by saying that he's speaking in his own capacity. He doesn't necessarily want to speak on behalf of the commission. Um, to which Kristen Smith, the head of a prominent lobbying group, Blockchain Association, told me in an interview afterwards that Gensler would probably have no trouble saying that a share of Apple stock is a security, but that in and of itself, I get the sense that aside from not wanting to speak for the commission, I'm guessing that the SEC has several investigations or and perhaps pending enforcement actions that are going to at least indirectly or implicitly imply that Ether is a security. So he doesn't want to sort of put those out in the open until that day comes.
Stephen, in our conversation earlier, I wrote down something that you said that I really liked, and you said new financial world. That's where we're at right now. And back in February, you and I talked about whether or not we would see regulations, and you said you were hopeful because there are some questions that really need to be answered here. So now, as we sit here 3 months later, are we any closer to more regulations?
Yeah, as we sit here, it's hard to know, and if we're closer to new regulation, and sometimes the problem is that even if you see progress, even if a bill gets out of a committee, even if a bill passes the House or the Senate, then it has to still be signed by the president. So a lot needs to go right. Right now, we're in a climate where the big debate is focusing on the debt ceiling and whether or not the U.S. may no longer be able to pay its bills, at least once June starts, which is the latest reporting that I saw. That said, I have spoken with a couple of members of Congress in recent days, in particular about the stablecoin bill, and and they are confident that in the next quarter or next couple of months that there will be a unified bill that can get out of committee and hopefully be voted on by the full House. But then it's going to have to be reconciled again with the Senate. It's going to have to pass the Senate. It's going to have to pass the president's desk and be signed into law. So we'll see. I do know that a lot of members of the community are hoping that the European Union passing again its landmark legislation will sort of light up like a fire underneath some of these lawmakers, so that while they are working hard to pass legislation to understand the key issues at bay, which is not something that was necessarily the case several years ago, that they're going to find a way to move over differences, paste or bridge their differences as quickly as possible so that they don't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Stephen, obviously, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but do you think the fallout from FTX paired with the collapsing of crypto friendly banks really made the need for regulations come to a head here?
I do think that it created an opportunity and it showed the potential harm that could come from doing nothing. So from that point of view, it could be good. And I mean, obviously, customer harm is not something that either one of us, Brittany, would ever wish for. But and hopefully that those bankruptcies can be processed in an expeditious manner so that the creditors of those companies get as much restitution as possible. So it did certainly create an opportunity. That said, I think maybe the one wrench that is also through is that it created, I think, more of a partisan divide over crypto than there was perhaps last year. And last year on the Democratic side, I know, for instance, Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, had been seen as sort of fighting crypto tooth and nail at every possible turn. But I did get the sense that the Democrats and Republicans were working together to try to find a way forward with bipartisan legislation that would set rules of the road for this industry. And I think that I do fear in some ways that the very public collapses of FTX, where crypto becomes a political football. Gary Gensler himself sort of becomes, I think, a weather vane for how different parties are feeling about the industry. Could create a few more challenges. So, and that's on top of what is just intellectually or academically a very difficult legislative or regulatory question. So it could create an opportunity, but it also, again, throw a few more wrenches into the works that need to be overcome.
How are you feeling? Are you feeling optimistic right now? Are you feeling what is your sense here?
My sense is that we are going to see progress on a stablecoin bill first before anything else, and the reason is just that it's the simplest. The In fact, there's even a template where I know lawmakers on both sides see as working. Back in June, the New York State's financial regulator, Adrienne Harris, and her team at the NYDFS released pretty comprehensive guidance with regards to regulating stablecoins, as far as when they need to be audited, the types of collateral that are allowed to be held against these assets that are in circulation, how redemptions work, and how quickly people need to be able to redeem their assets. And obviously, it's a big lift from going from how one of 50 states is regulating an asset to a national piece of legislation. But New York is as a financial hub, it is an epicenter of crypto activity in the country, and I think it provides a pretty good roadmap that I know that lawmakers are trying to follow. Right now, I think the biggest inhibitors for stablecoin legislation include, for one, whether or not states have the ability to authorize or banks or non-bank service providers to launch stablecoins, if there's going to be some, or if that licensing or regulatory authority has to come from the Fed, or excuse me, at the federal level. That seems to be the one major hangup, and perhaps one way to get over that is by having some sort of federal backstop or some sort of minimum threshold of regulatory guidance, so that there can't just be, at least from the Democratic side, like one state out of 50 that is very lax in authorizing stablecoin issuers to potentially the detriment of the rest of the country. So I get the sense that lawmakers are hopeful that they're going to be that's one of those types of bridges or gaps that's going to be able to be overcome, so that we can at least see stablecoin legislation. And then, of course, the bigger prize is a more overarching piece of legislation that will settle debates as to whether or not certain digital assets are securities or commodities, and therefore who the primary regulator would be it the SEC or the CFTC, or perhaps somebody else. And once we kind of get to, if and when we get that, then I think the U.S. will be back on the same regulatory footing as the European Union and some other progressive jurisdictions around the world.